And we are live as our studio audience joins us. That is 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Lifestyle Business.
Really? Are you trying something new?
Okay, let's do it again.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Ann. And this is Lifestyle Business. We have a great show today.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Happy Thursday. I know. Yeah. It's second weekend of Jazz Fest. Who's ready? Also, Kentucky Derby, if it was 2019. But no, today we are coming to you from our shelter in place in Healdsburg, California, with Tulane professor in business, Rob Lalka. And he's going to be talking to us about the entrepreneurship and innovation lessons he's been teaching and now are coming to life amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we're going to talk to Karen Shalett, Sommer Shalett.
All right.
Or as we learned yesterday, sometimes Karen Sommer Shalett, which is what Scott was called during our conference.
Maybe they're trying to change it.
It may be. I mean, now is the time to change stuff. So Karen Sommer Shalett is going to come and talk to us about PSI's pivot during these times to stay true to their mission of fighting global health on the front lines around the world. It's going to be amazing. That's right, Scott. A little bit of a name pivot. Anyway, I'm pretty excited for the show. Are you?
I'm very excited. It's going to be a fun show. It's been a good week here, and it's interesting. There's sort of like the natives are restless, right? Some of the guys in the co-working space
someone did say that to us yesterday.
We're just talking about like they're gonna maybe we should file a litigation against Governor Newsom about opening back up, and there's
get out there.
Protests happening. Nashville, or Launchpad Nashville, has a opening plan. Uncertain if it is opening or not. Stay tuned.
California has an opening plan too.
California has an opening plan.
It was frightening.
But things will be different. We're going to be wearing masks and doing stuff. We've been wearing masks. Probably everybody has on the show. So. Yeah. Hey, Rob. Yeah. Hey, Alec.
Trendsetters.
All right.
Yeah. What were you you had a riff for us?
You're like, do your riff right now.
Just tee it up. It's on the schedule, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, I thought you would find this interesting, just in terms of like the nature of what we're all going through right now. A lot of people have been, referring to this as a black swan event, which is one of those things that, I know you know what a black swan event is, but you can't plan for, throws off all business plans. We should start using that to describe it to our landlords, right?
This is a black swan event.
It's a black swan event. How could we possibly plan? But I recently came across a new description of it that I had not heard before that I thought you would find interesting, that it's actually a black elephant event.
Wow. Why is it called a black elephant?
Well, why is that relevant to you? Why do you find that interesting?
I find it interesting because oftentimes I call Chris an elephant because he's sometimes stubborn, and he gets stuck on his things. And so I often will refer to the carved elephant we have in our living room, and I will say, is elephant. And it's a nice way of reminding him that maybe he might be sticking on a point.
We literally have an elephant from Africa sitting in our living room. So we have an elephant in the room. So wait, was that the stubbornness? Was that it? Or were you referring to the elephant in the room? It's the elephant in the room. The black elephant is a better descriptor for this event because it's the elephant in the room that we've all been ignoring, right? There were clear warning signs about the disruption that a pandemic could cause. Bill Gates, many people have been kind of talking about this. We had a task force at the federal government that all got laid off. So this was a event that actually was just simply ignored in terms of the threat level. So it's a black elephant event, something that you...
So it's not a stubborn event, although Donald Trump was being stubborn in not acknowledging it. So right. He was acting a little like an elephant.
Totally ignoring it.
But also it was the elephant in the room that we all were sort of avoiding and ignoring.
It's not a totally unpredictable event. If you were thinking about threat levels, this should be something that, in many countries, it was, not ours.
And safe to say, I mean, it's only sort of 8 or 9 weeks ago that in the stream of consciousness of all of us, we even thought it was a possibility. Even as Wuhan was happening, I don't think we ever really...
No, we were blissfully enjoying Mardi Gras.
We were. We talked about wearing masks through San Francisco airport on our way to Mardi Gras, but we didn't get around to finding the masks, so that sort of went out the window. So it was a passing thought, but it was a passing thought not because obviously of New Orleans. It was a passing thought because of SFO, which was, obviously a place where a lot of flights were coming in. It was the place that they brought folks, so makes sense.
But here we are. We're now on the way back, and everybody's thinking about what it's going to be like when we get back. What do you think?
Well, I think I've been spouting that there are going to be big changes out there, and how we all come back and just on the collective. And I think it's funny that you bring that up, because I think something we've been talking about is leading. Right? So leading the change we want to be, because I think we're hearing on all fronts that people keep saying, it's okay, things are going to go back to normal. It's going to be back to normal. Our landlords say that. And I think everybody wants it to some way to go back to normal. I was at Music Tech yesterday speaking. It was super fun. And we were on this conversation around community building and engagement in a virtual world, which obviously is relevant for today. And as we were having the conversation, I was like the one odd kid out who wasn't in the music industry. And I was talking about kind of how there's this opportunity for us to use platforms, and sort of everybody is self-producing, so we can actually try things that would have previously been impossible to actually try. And it was really interesting because people kept saying things like, when we go to festivals, and one of my partners on the panel was a ticketing company, and they were talking about, well, we have to be thoughtful about what the ticketing world looks like in the context of time and how long it takes. And so they're like, when we actually go back to shows and concerts and festivals, X, Y, and Z. And there is this when you identified it as confirmation bias, right? Which is, everyone in the room has built their business on the fact that there's going to be live shows, and that people go to festivals, and that's how music is consumed. And actually what the platforms have done to music has been devastating from an industry and a financial perspective. And so it was kind of interesting to hear all these folks talking about the future in a post-COVID world, and everybody was sort of saying when we go back to festivals. And of course I sort of didn't say that because me.
Well, everybody has their own view on how it's going to come back, right? And it's how they want it to come back.
Well, that's the confirmation bias, right? Exactly. And so I think that's been pretty interesting. But I got a note after my talk, right? And I think this is cool, which is, first of all, we can learn from other industries. That's why you started the Wine Down, right? So that we can actually talk to winemakers about their entrepreneurial journey. We can all learn from it. We can all learn from each other. But it was interesting. I got a quote, and I'm just going to say it because it's a compliment. So what did she say? She said, thank you for shooting. Oh, I'll start with, your comments were the highlight of my time at NOLA Music Tech.
Oh, you don't want to skip that part.
I didn't want to skip that highlight. She said, thank you for shooting straight and pushing us to pivot. And I think that is the point, which is they all were like, when we go back to the music, so I was like, it's not going back that way. Why are you thinking that? And this also comes into the whole point of we were also on INNO yesterday. And we were speaking on that. And INNO is all about cross-collaboration amongst industries. And I think that's great because you can learn from everyone else. Now, what's also challenging is a lot of people, INNO was focused a lot on corporate. and corporate innovation. And similar to the music tech world, what I started to see is that when you're sort of focused on corporates and you have larger brands and you have more established players, they're much more afraid of saying something, right? They're not going to make predictions. They're not going to shoot from the hip. They're going to be somewhat controlled and they also don't have the ability to pivot quickly, right? Their idea of pivot is like, let's get ourselves in a war room and do some thinking and planning and run the structure
that startups have, right?
Yes.
Or entrepreneurs.
Yes. Yeah. So my point is now, like, God, if we want to do confirmation bias and not think that the world is going to change and how do we actually change it, fine. But if you can pivot, like come up with a TV show for yourselves, this is the time because the field is empty, right? Literally.
Well, the best way to predict the future is to create it, right?
Create the future. And that's
Do you know who said that?
What? Who?
Abe Lincoln.
Oh. Ahead of his time.
Yeah.
So many ways. Anyway, it was kind of nice. It's refreshing to be in front of a different audience. I got a little energized. But let's jump into the show. We can talk a little bit about the conference experience later.
Okay.
Let's introduce Rob. So Rob, as you are coming up.
Rob, I'm going to promote you to a panelist and bring you in while Ian's introducing you.
Talk about leading. That has been our thing, which is it's not going to be the same. That's okay. Let's actually lead us all to where we want to be. Where do we want that puck to go? And we will figure that out. So Rob Lalka is a professor of practice at the A.B. Freeman School of Business at Tulane University and the executive director of the Albert Lepage Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. He previously served in the U.S. Department of State's Office of Global Partnerships and was on the Secretary of State's policy planning staff. He and his wife, Lynn, reside in New Orleans' Broadmoor neighborhood, where he serves as a commissioner for the Broadmoor Improvement Association. Hey, Rob, welcome.
You guys have a TV show.
We got a TV show. Man.
How things change in 5 or 6 weeks.
I usually see you in your office, Rob, with all your books and looks super fancy.
My new office. This is our bedroom with the only plain wall we have. It's not a weird backdrop. Yeah.
There you go. Well, welcome aboard. How's it going?
We're okay. We're hunkered down. We're taking this thing as seriously as anyone can take it. My wife is due May 20th. And so we've got number 2 on the way very soon. And they literally are telling me if I end up even with a fever, I'm not getting to see this kiddo be born. So I'm taking this very seriously.
I was going to ask you that because we just saw a newborn at the farmer's market the other day. And the mom said, oh God, I was so glad my husband could come with me because in New York, you can't.
That's right. Yep. They're literally refusing. So we will be able to, but I've got to stay super healthy. All of us do. So I hope you guys are continuing as you make this transition. Let me just underscore how important it is that you guys do it safely and securely for your family. We need you guys to keep leading. So
we are. We do have to come into this office, but that's all right because take a break from our baby for a few hours.
There you go.
And then we get back and get to cuddle again. So let's jump in. You guys are doing a ton of stuff. We've been watching what's going on with the Lepage Center. You've got a new program there. Why don't you tell us about what it's like on the ground for entrepreneurship in New Orleans and how you guys are helping lead sort of this phase. Obviously you speak on this and you teach on this, but now you're actually living it. Living it. So
yeah, everyone is trying to be as innovative and as entrepreneurial, and so those words are literally in the name of the very long name center that you described with all the titles.
So many titles.
Every time someone starts to read my bio, I literally just start to cringe. So look, we are fortunate that at Tulane we have some of the very best public health experts in the world, and we were watching this thing in January into February. The big moment for us was New Orleans Entrepreneur Week because we had Book Fest, which is a brand new thing that we're really ramping up that Tulane is behind. It was the week before Entrepreneur Week and then Entrepreneur Week. And basically the week prior to those 2 weeks, we canceled everything. And that hurt. Honestly, at that point, we didn't really know what the right decision was. we had made decisions internally, working with the Idea Village and with everybody else, but like pretty early on, that a lot of this ended up being around the governor's order. So the governor's order was what then put everything into place, not only for Bookfest, but Entrepreneur Week, and then also, of course, Tulane went online just as UNO and Loyola and everybody else did. And so, so that was a lot of pain all at once. And this sort of started in a moment of like, are we doing the right thing? Because we really don't even know how serious this is, but we've got to trust the public health experts, knowing that deals get done at Entrepreneur Week. We have a number of people that were going to come into town that would have been great for our ecosystem. You know, investments, like we thought that there was a real balance there of what economically do we need to do versus public health. And I'm really glad I'm on with Karen today, because I've become a deep believer that the science is the most important thing for any of us right now.
Right.
And if we aren't smart enough to listen to the scientists and we start to make decisions based upon, you know, short-term economic rebound, like that is not going to be smart. It's just really that's not using all of the sort of, if we have all the smart people, we might as well listen to the smartest ones on this topic. A lot of people became public health experts overnight, and just because you read a bunch of articles doesn't make you one, right? And so, so I'm really glad that Karen's on, because I'm looking actually mostly to listen to her about what her thoughts are about how we open up. But just quickly to answer the question you put about what have we done, we, like y'all, a lot of what we do is in person. Tulane, it's the random meeting between a student who is in the makerspace and a student who's, you know, coding a new program, and then the liberal arts student, and then the business student, and all of them create a company. And that's awesome. Like, that's what I love teaching for, is because you have these happy coincidences that happen in our space, just like it does for y'all in Launchpad. And that's how companies get created. It's also how new ideas get to circulate. It's hard to do that virtually, like, just admittedly, that's hard to do. It's also harder to be able to teach with that same dynamic when you're all doing it. My version of LPTV, which is my, you know, class every Monday, Wednesday, and then Tuesday and Thursday. And so, you know, this was tough, going from not having NOLA at all and now teaching online. We tried to figure out, how do we do it? And our best answer is that the Lepage Center needs to be a platform. And that platform needs to be in service both to our students, but more importantly to New Orleans, because we're getting slammed. I mean, when you think about all of the places that we had made our bets, even after Katrina, it's hospitality, it's food and restaurants, it's tourism, it's conferences, it's trade, I mean, go down that entire list, and we got slammed. Social distancing is what is going to continue to be, you know, a plague, a economic plague for all of those. And it's really harsh on New Orleans.
Including the legacy industries of oil and gas, right? Energy.
Yeah, and then you have the oil and gas on the other side of things too, right? So when I can go buy gas for $1.19 down the street, that's not good for the state, you know?
That's always funny, right? When people are like, gas is so cheap, we're like, that is not what we're going for. I want expensive gas.
For multiple reasons, given the other black elephant event that is slow moving and that is a crisis, which is climate change, right? I mean, that's the thing too, is that we know the coastal, you know, erosion issues better than anybody else. Like, everything that you guys are focusing on now, I'm just really grateful, because, like, that's what I think, honestly, these are the conversations we need to elevate. And so, but, you know, New Orleans is getting slammed, and so we're just trying to do the best we can. And what that looks like is we've developed a mentor network that we had already been, you know, deploying towards student ventures, that now we're putting towards local businesses. And so businesses are signing up, they're meeting with our mentors. We've really been able to engage alumni affairs in our advancement office, which is our fancy word for fundraising. But they're working with all of our alums to get them engaged in this as well, to give back and to give their time. And so we're able to connect up these mentors to local businesses. And that's everyone from the high growth startups that are really getting slammed to the lifestyle businesses. And I'm glad, again, you guys are elevating that term and making it just as hot as you know, that venture-backed startup, because it needs to be for our economy. And so we're trying to really be that platform play and really scale that by making sure those connections go really well, and that they're curated, but that it does scale in terms of all the logistics. And so we're using Acuity for all the calendaring and all of that sort of work to make sure that we can scale that up as it grows. And the last thing we just announced last week is that Albert Lepage, so our donor who funded our center, is also funding, I'm really excited about this, for students who had jobs or internships that were rescinded. we will be paying them with new money that came to us from Albert to work at local small businesses and startups.
And so we applied.
There we go. Let's do it.
I hope we've applied. Serena, we better have applied.
There we go. So but that double-sided marketplace, again, that's something that you can do better through technology. It also is a way to get students an experience when, I mean, this poor COVID class, you can imagine what their life has been like. Like their cognizant life has been since 2008. It's been a story of growth. And here they are graduating from college and the bottom falls out on them. And it's exogenous. It has nothing to do with what they studied or how hard they worked or anything else. And so
it's even worse than the Gen X years.
It's really scary for them because it also doesn't go away. You know, when you think about this, like they don't know anything but growth, and they're in a situation now where there could be second, third waves, whatever else of this that continues to deepen the pain. So all of that to be said, like we are doing the best we can. The analogy, the story I tell to my students and to my team is the starfish story of, you know, you're walking along the beach and this old man sees this kid and he's throwing starfish in the sea. And the old man says, well, what are you doing? And the kid says, well, if I leave them here, they're all going to dry up because it's low tide and the sun's bearing down on them. Mm-hmm. And the old man says, well, you can't possibly throw all these thousands of starfish back into the sea. They're all going to die. And the kid goes, yeah, so, and he goes, well, you can't make a difference, bottom line. And then the kid picks up a starfish, throws it in the sea and says, well, I made a difference to that one. And, you know, it's really corny, I know, but that to me is just it. You have to make sure you're throwing every starfish you can and doing the little bit you can each day. And so that's what we're trying to do.
I love it. And now I have a story to go with, but I actually said that exact thing in the panel around kind of transitioning to virtual communities. And believe it or not, I was like, actually moving into a virtual community makes me realize how important it is to connect, but to not think about scale. And I think a lot of people have thought about community and online and virtual engagement as being likes and number of comments and number of followers, which are like ad metrics. Those are ad metrics. That's actually not community. It's not engagement. And what I have been sort of saying is that if we can help one person, right? It doesn't matter how many people watch. It matters that one person actually got some value from what we actually did. If we can help one person navigate PPP or ask better questions, then we've done our job. So every day we don't have to get up and say, how many millions of viewers do we have? Or how many people are we able to send information to and get resources to? We just have to think about, are we actually helping someone? Because for the most part, like, we all go through our daily lives doing things because we think they're the right things to do. And we don't necessarily always think about actually helping one person.
I think that's right. But the thing that I love about even this is that you guys are recording this. So it will be a repository of great information that you will have online that does scale, right? Yeah. We're building it to scale. It doesn't have to necessarily scale today. It can scale literally over the next few weeks. Like if something that Karen says is something that someone takes home and then tweets about, and then it starts to take off because we need that public health information in such a serious way right now. And we're not public health experts. Right. That is how it does scale. And all you guys are being as a platform. Right. And so that's the same way we're thinking about our work, is that we'll make individual connections, but then you never know who builds a relationship through a mentor meeting. And then that network effect that like you truly cannot track. Like some of this impact is you can track, but some of it you're not. And that's fine by me, because ultimately that's the way the world works anyways. It's just we're experiencing it in a different way right now. And we're looking at it with a bit of a different lens.
Yeah. Rob, I want to come back to New Orleans Entrepreneur Week a little bit and see if I've got sort of a little bit of a theory here that I want to run by you. I thought,
I don't know what it is.
Even prior to this, it was really interesting to see Tulane and Idea Village and you and John Atkinson kind of coming together to host and produce NOE this year. Obviously, you had cancellation, which, is unfortunate, but hopefully that partnership remains strong. But in a crisis, we recall Katrina, it drives collaboration, right? There's this notion of we're all in this together. Sometimes we forget that and we think about our little fiefdoms and our organizations and our own little ecosystems, but this is where all that gets flattened and it says, okay, we're all in this together. Let's cooperate. And you were already doing that with John. What's interesting to me is now some of the folks who went through Katrina and went through this rebuilding are actually in leadership positions, are in positions of power, and so I'm hopeful that both New Orleans as a national model, but also New Orleans for the city of New Orleans, that there is going to be tremendous collaboration because we've all been through it before and we know what it took. And in some ways, we sort of miss that, right? Because there was a wonderful energy during that time, and that's exactly what it's going to take to recover from all of the hits that you described that were unfortunately, coming our way in New Orleans.
Yeah, the data center has some really good information on just how hard this is going to hit. They say that, I think I'm getting the numbers right, 27% of folks can stay at home, 18% are sort of maybes, and then 49% are at high risk of losing their jobs. And these are people who already had jobs, folks. Like, these are people who were, whether they were working in restaurants or whatever else. I mean, we go through the list, right? This doesn't include the underemployed and unemployed. Like Jazz Fest this week is over $300 million in economic impact for our city. Essence, $280 million. French Quarter Fest is $160 million. Like, these numbers really do deeply add up, and that's severe. And so it will take a all hands on deck approach. Everything is public-private now anyways, right? Like, everything in terms of, with the PPP and everything else, like, it is all public-private. When you put trillions of dollars of government money behind the private sector at every level, that's all public-private. Okay. Yeah. And so collaboration is already happening even from that sense. And so the people who will do it best will, just like the Katrina experience, be the people who are able to come together and find the overlap of that Venn diagram. Yeah. Public sector, private sector, philanthropy, nonprofits. And the key for me, and this is what I teach my students, and it's what I just deeply believe in, is that the longer you can stay in that area where the Venn is overlapping, where everybody's interest is aligned, and grow that. There's a technical term, it's the Rouleau triangle, like where they all overlap. Like, that's where you need to grow it. The more you can do that, and that's what New Orleans is really good at as a community, which is, I think, part of the reason why we're able to respond to Katrina in that way. But it's also, it was necessary. It was a necessity, mother of invention kind of moment. Like, that right there is what I think a lot of us will need to learn how to do better. And that's promising for solving some of these bigger problems in terms of impact investing, in terms of just, all of the other black elephants that we need to solve for.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to listen to the experts, and we need to bring people with expertise to the table to help to solve these problems. And then think of the huge total addressable markets that are available once we start to move money towards solving some of those larger issues that have seemed, intractable previously. So, this is both, we have to do it because, oh my gosh, this is existential. We are in serious trouble economically. And we are putting resources behind a public-private answer like never before. So we might as well really just quadruple down on that being the way that we're going to do things. And
because it's clear that there is no other way. Public-private, it has to be that, right? This is, both, sort of the things that are coming at us, the pandemic, which is going to have a long half-life over the next year and years, as well as climate change and everything else that's sort of behind it. Private can't do it. Federal government can't do it. It is it requires that collaboration and that alignment of interests. That's it. What was the term you used for the overlapping?
It's the Rouleau triangle is where they all overlap. And the key, though, is just...
Aaron, put that in the chat for us.
There you go. Yeah. The key is to have the same... this is the key part. You need to have the same language to make sure that you're understanding what that looks like, what that success can look like.
Yeah.
And so understand that social value, and what does social value investing really look like? Like, when you're talking about how do you measure that performance. Right now we're doing that. Let's just be honest. It is about ICU units. It is about death counts. It is about people who have had the disease and people who have recovered from it. We are all, whether you're a CEO or whether you're, in the White House, those are the numbers you're staring at, right?
Yeah.
The key will be, how do you, when you talk about economic resurgence, you need to make sure you're looking not just at the way it benefits the very wealthiest, but also how do you have an inclusive recovery? How do you be more resilient? And what does resilience mean in terms of measuring that? Like, those numbers are going to be like, we're going to have to get everyone behind that too. And I think as the public sector that has put your and my taxpayer dollars behind this recovery, like that's what that money is, that's going in the trillions of dollars to be able to soften this blow a little bit. Like, that's money that could have been spent on schools or infrastructure or other things in prior years. We need accountability around that. In my mind, that does require impact metrics to make sure that the private sector and the public sector, and then every other sector, like we said, can understand what that overlap looks like, and then can keep pressing there to grow that, to be able to make that response more meaningful.
I think that's a good point though, too, which is what that focus area is going to change over time, right? And so I think of the sort of the PPP loan as an example of trillions of dollars being spread. I feel like that's not a rebuilding phase. That is like, how do I actually solve the fundamental vulnerabilities that are existing in the entire city and the community, right? And we've gone from cities where you've had very vulnerable communities that has seemed very hard to reach, to seeing those vulnerable communities explode in numbers overnight. And then at the same time, you've got an explosion of a major health crisis, as Karen's going to talk to us a little bit about, that is requiring immediate assistance too. And so it's like, there's the immediate jump, but we're not necessarily, I think people are not seeing, and that's what we were talking about, this confirmation bias, like, oh, it'll go back to normal, right? The landlord's like, it's okay. Like, everything's going to be, your business is going to be even better, right? And you're like, you know what? This is big. This isn't sort of like 1 month. And I think people have been through Katrina, because I haven't. And I think a lot of the world left the sort of focus of Katrina mid-September, 2 or 3 weeks after, right? Kind of like, oh, that's done. The hurricane's over. The flooding's happened. The Superdome situation is crazy. A lot of people didn't realize that, like, people didn't have homes for months and months and months and months. And I think that experience collectively, and what's exciting is, because none of us are actually in person, the nation can tap into that collective experience, right? And so from a New Orleans Katrina perspective, we have a message that can be spread. We have experience that can be shared, and we can guide sort of the longer term fix for other places if we don't just look internally about what do we have to do in New Orleans, because we actually have a lot of people on the ground. We need leaders in New Orleans to say, how are we going to fix this across the US?
I certainly hope so. One just huge caveat that I just want to name is, anybody who is saying that things will get back to normal is coming from a place of privilege, where things have seemed somewhat normal for them because they've had their groceries delivered to them. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or because they've ordered from Waiter or Uber Eats or whatever else every night. Okay. And the inconvenience to them is it's just inconvenience. It's not that they have to worry about paychecks hitting their bank accounts or being kicked out of their home or any of this. And the disparity around race is something we just have to name, and name again and again and again. Catherine Powell, and I'll put it in the chat after I'm done chatting back and forth with you guys here, has an amazing piece in CNN that talks about the color of COVID, where she says this is a two-sided coin, where both Black and brown people are dying more from this because they are more vulnerable. A lot of that comes from social determinants of health and systemic issues and inequities that are just very deep in our society, especially in places like New Orleans. Yep. Which we woke up to with Katrina, but evidently we didn't wake up to for long enough because we didn't solve enough of it on one side. But the other side is that those are also the people who are working in the grocery stores and who are delivering the food disproportionately, right? It's because they have to work. And so there's this horrible, like, double-sided coin here, where it is literally the people who are most vulnerable who are getting the disease, and the people who are asking societally, in part because of economics, that are going to be at the front lines and that continue to be. And that's my real fear, is that as we transition back to a more open economy, like, did we just ignore that? Did we just look at the data and we just ignored that happened? Or are we actually going to have a real conversation about what we need to do to be more inclusive about that? Because that, to me, is the Katrina experience as well, is that, like, not only did we get it wrong in New Orleans before Katrina, and we all looked at it and we said, how could this happen in a major American city? Especially when we saw so many people of color that were so hurt by it. But then longer term, like, white incomes went like this and black incomes went like this, right? And black incarceration rates continue to do this. You know, it's just like, we didn't pay attention, in my mind, to actually change some of this. And then the other article I would put forth is Reverend William Barber, and Mitch Landrieu had a piece in USA Today talking about how poverty is literally that other elephant in the room that we have not really focused on, especially around this. And so my hope is that we can build a more resilient, more entrepreneurial society, but it also needs to be more inclusive. Just bottom line, we need to find ways to make sure that, like, whatever comes out of this, if we are spending this amount of tax dollars, like, it needs to be more equitable than where we were before. And that's something I'm going to fight for as much as I can.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to leave it. And I appreciate the candor there, because I do think it's very easy for people to get stuck into sort of like the day-to-day minutia of their own worlds, especially when that world is, you know, confined within your home. Mm-hmm. Those issues of ennui and frustration and close quarters, those problems are a privilege, right? That is a lucky place to be right now. And as I said, you know, I think our vulnerable communities and the population of those vulnerable has exploded. And, you know, those of us who we think about sort of the challenges or our businesses, it's interesting. Like, I don't think after the first week of kind of a crisis mode where we're like, what is going to come? I think that we have turned into a position of gratefulness and being okay with whatever happens, right? Furlough your whole team, your whole effing team. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Everybody's going to be fine, right? Everybody's healthy. The business will either fail or succeed at some level, but at the end of the day, we're fine, right? We're living in our lives. We're doing all these pieces. And I think that's the sort of spirit of entrepreneurship, which is like, that's not the tragedy here.
Yep.
The tragedy is loss of death, loss of homes, loss of food sources, loss of community, loss of all those pieces. The collateral damage and the economic rebuilding that needs to happen will come, right? Everybody will dust themselves off, and those with privileged positions will be able to do it. I love the message of inclusivity, because if we don't include the rest of our economy, we basically have seen the future. Now it's time for us to create the future that we want.
There we go. That's exactly it. And because for New Orleans right now, I would love to be at Jazz Fest right now, right? I would love to be at Jazz Fest right now. It's my favorite thing. I proposed my wife at Jazz Fest. I met her when I came back to New Orleans during Jazz Fest and then moved here.
It's where Chris meets all his wives.
Ooh. Dodge, Perry. But like, here's the point, is that the culture creators that we undervalue anyways, like, just got hit the hardest on that. Like, that 330 million of economic impact is for the hotels and everybody else. But really, when you think about what does it do to musicians, what does it do to people who are selling art, you know, in the quarter, what are they like, and right? Like, all of those people make most of their income during festival season. And so for us to complain about having to miss, you know, John Mayer, like, just doesn't quite, you know, fit with the way that you should see the world, as far as I'm concerned. And so I will stand on the soapbox for as long as anyone will let me talk. I'm going to be quiet now because I really want to hear from Karen about.
Right. Yeah. Let's get Karen on. All right. Thank you, Rob.
All right,
so
Rob,
much.
good to see you. And thank you for your comments. We should have Rob ask
Karen some questions.
Yeah.
All right.
You can in the chat.
I will.
Right. Karen Sommer Shalett, or if she'd like, Karen Sommer Shalett serves as Director of External Relations and Communications for PSI. Since 2014, she has been responsible for helping PSI strategically communicate its thought leadership, advocacy initiatives, and global health impact across 55 countries. Prior to joining PSI, Karen was editor-at-large at the Aspen Institute, an award-winning journalist covering the economic and cultural transition of the capital city for the Washington Post and DC Magazine. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina for the New Orleans Times-Pic, as well as the global cultural landscape of fashion, art, architecture, and design for publications ranging from Condé Nast Lucky Magazine to the International Herald Tribune. And she is one of my fashion inspos.
Oh,
always.
wow.
And look at Karen. She knows what to do. She's got a good backdrop. She's got a great outfit on. You could teach your husband a few things.
We do our best. We do our best. Hey, guys, how are you?
We're doing great. How are you?
Great to see you. Where are you?
Well, I'm actually in Scott's office, but I want to show everybody, if I can, the background here is, I don't know, I probably can't read it. I see there's lights, but talking about entrepreneurial and reviving musicians, particularly of New Orleans. After Hurricane Katrina at the 5-year anniversary, Scott and I hosted a rather largely attended concert here in New Orleans to raise money for here in DC to raise money for musicians in New Orleans. And we had quite a few New Orleans musicians come up to DC, and they became our fast friends. And we're all almost 10 years later, 10 years later, we're still dear friends with them, and so grateful for all they add to the world. So I'm with Rob and you guys. Much rather be at Jazz Fest right now than hold up here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we can all kind of create our own virtual Jazz Fest. I think I might be festing this weekend in Healdsburg. Maybe we can fest together.
Love that idea.
Throw on some OZ. Yeah.
Nice.
Maybe I'll make some crawfish Monica.
Ooh, will you send it this way?
Yeah.
I will not be. That is not on the diet. I can tell you that. Maybe I'm extra grateful we're not at Jazz Fest this year.
I gave up COVID-19 on my hips, actually.
All right, there we go. Okay, Karen, I think we're all dying to know. Talk to us a little bit about kind of how your organization is pivoting right now, and what do we have to expect? And then we'll jump into some questions, okay?
Yeah, let me share a little bit about who PSI is and what we do. Population Services International. This year actually was our 50th anniversary celebration year. I say was because that's what we were planning for before COVID hit. Amazingly, we very much have been able to pivot the theme of our anniversary, which was 50 forward. We felt like the last thing we wanted to be was an elephant. In fact, dinosaur was the word that we were using. And it was vital to remind our stakeholders that 50 years of experience actually allows you to pick the most innovative nuggets and really look at where you broke boundaries all across the way as you continue to do that. What's so interesting is that actually by understanding our market, which is markets in 55 countries in various global health needs for some of the most vulnerable communities on the planet, we were actually setting ourselves up in advancing a lot of technology that has become vital during COVID. And one of the focuses that we really wanted people to understand in our work, and we were using our 50 Forward 50th anniversary to talk about, was actually how the health system itself all over the world, we didn't expect in the Western Hemisphere, but we're seeing it here now, was just overburdened and unable to take on even the needs pre-pandemic. Because as Chris said, there's been plenty of epidemics and pandemics that have come before, Ebola, Zika, cholera, HIV, AIDS, that we can understand where the health system is. And there's a real lack of healthcare workers, particularly in developing countries. And so what we were looking at was, how do you bring care to the front door for individuals and keep them out of clinics? And what does that mean? We were calling it self-care. And of course, self-care has a lot of in the Western hemisphere, we think of it as wellness and yoga, and those are all part of it. But the WHO's definition of self-care has much more to do with being able to administer care to yourself in a variety of ways. And that could be contraception. You know, if we forget access to reproductive health and family planning during the time of COVID, we could wind up with, I heard this morning something like, you know what, I'm not going to use numbers because I'm not going to quote them right, but astonishing numbers of increases in maternal mortality, as well as unsafe abortions and unwanted pregnancies. And already in the world, there are 240 million women who want access to contraception who can't get it. And then now add on top of this that they can't go to the clinic with any regularity. Where would they go? So our work was already moving in the direction of making sure that the pharmacy, that entrepreneurs were part of that market landscape to help people get care at the places where they already were, instead of having to get on 4 buses and go 18 miles into town to get to a place that might already be overcrowded. Having said that, I want to be really, really clear. Rob knows me from a lot of different ways. I am not a public health expert. I play one at work. And not even that. Our public health experts are doing tremendous work, both in the field and at the global level, to create policies and practices. And I'm thrilled to support them, but I am a communications expert. And the fact that PSI has pivoted so quickly from our health areas that we are still working in, but how we're working in them have changed, which are contraception. I talked about reproductive health and family planning, but malaria, which kills more people in a year than COVID will. And the supply chain challenges that we're having right now with malaria for a myriad of COVID related reasons. We also work in cervical cancer and the human papilloma virus that can lead to cervical cancer. We work in sanitation solutions and making sure that there's appropriate toilets in communities across the world. Hand washing, sanitation on the level of hygiene, which of course is a huge issue right now. So we are still doing all of those things. HIV, which we are actually learning from HIV very much how to manage, how to prevent COVID, and also how to integrate testing. And so when we were talking, I was talking about a variety of pivots that we're making. One of them in the self-care realm I was talking about is actually with HIV self-testing. That's something that PSI brought to sub-Saharan Africa over the last 5 years. And we are looking at how we did that to integrate COVID self-testing, COVID-19 self-testing, and also messages for prevention. And it's a very interesting internal battle. It's not a battle. It's a very there's an internal tension even in PSI, because believe it or not, the same raw materials needed for HIV self-testing, for malaria rapid diagnostic testing, they're all the same materials and manufacturers that will be needed for COVID-19 diagnostic testing, rapid diagnostic testing. And so as we look at supply chains,
the challenge there, sort of prioritizing which testing needs to happen first.
Yeah, and interestingly, it's who gets to make those choices, right? So you guys are entrepreneurs. Who do you think makes those choices?
The medical and pharmaceutical companies based on demand.
Based on the market, right? Yeah. So if the northern economy, the northern politicians are willing to pay for COVID tests,
right?
What happens to the southern hemisphere when they need not only COVID tests but malaria tests,
right.
HIV tests? So it's it is something that the WHO and other partners are working on right as we speak. But it's very challenging.
Which is interesting because, as we think about it, we're now thinking about the global world and vulnerable societies and communities within that. And what Rob was talking about is sort of like that notion, and we were having that conversation about ecosystem building, right? It's interesting because money does make the world go round. And if we're just sort of holding on to the resources that we have, there's massive pieces of society in the globe that are going to lack from that. And you can imagine that in the city, right? Like if we're holding on to our capital and our resources and we're like, I still need to do my thing. Maybe you don't need to do your thing anymore, right? Maybe you don't need to go to Jazz Fest. And so it's like a very interesting challenge, because I think we're all entrenched in our own self-interests. And so if we have more money, we have the ability to go and get those diagnostic tests and not really think about the impact that has. I mean, and I think the malaria debate is an interesting one, which was, you made a comment, or there was some article written or something along those lines, which was like the malaria medication that's was being promoted by our president. You know, the massive, first of all, that would create shortfalls for that malaria medication to be able to be accessed by people who have malaria. But I thought was really scary was the notion that if you start to use these things without thinking about the downstream impact, all of a sudden we might be creating a malaria that becomes resistant to that actual medicine. And so then we create two global pandemics on our mats that are very difficult to do. And so I don't know how you prioritize it. And anyway, how are you prioritizing it? It would be a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that we are doing actively, and in fact, PSI has done a tremendous job, and anyone listening, I would suggest this for you, though I know your businesses are much smaller. We've done a tremendous job. I don't do this, so I'm not tooting my horn, but on internal communications. So we have been hearing from all of our scientific experts quite a bit. And one thing that came across today in our brown bag was trust the scientific experts, not the politicians. Mm-hmm. I think Rob lent, credibility to this as well. But one of the things that we did learn out of this chloroquine is that, number one, yes, it is this was something that was being talked about, if you recall, from the White House podium. Mm-hmm. It found actually to have some really harmful issues with taking chloroquine when you don't have malaria, or if you don't have lupus. That's another place that was really necessarily used. Chloroquine, I don't believe has treated malaria for some time because of resistance that had built up. But there are active ingredients in it, in malaria components. But yeah, I mean, again, you ask how to prioritize. I think that this revolution is being televised. I think it's going to be ongoing. We're going to learn as we go how when you have only a certain amount of raw materials, how do you use them?
It's interesting. You were mentioning sort of the internal comms and talk to us about in countries around the world that may not have as much their day-to-day life might not be being on Twitter or Instagram. Countries in Africa and South America, like you said, the Southern Hemisphere. What is the perception of the threat of COVID-19, and is it as much of it is a threat clearly, but are the risk factors with malaria and AIDS and some of the work that has been ongoing, is that as important to keep up relative to sort of this pandemic that we're all facing right now, or are people around the world as focused on COVID as we are? We're obviously in our own little media bubble here in the U.S.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to remind you, I'm not a public health expert, but I can share what some of my colleagues have been talking about. So one of the things that was done incredibly well in the Southern Hemisphere for all kinds of reasons was shutting down borders. And so, we're seeing a lot lower case counts coming out of many of these countries. Now, one could say that's also because the capacity to test is lower. Mm-hmm. But at some point, people do have a need for ventilators or frankly die. And we're not seeing the increase of mortality just yet because there have been such severe lockdowns. Particularly, so if you look at South Africa, which is probably one of the more cosmopolitan, and exposed countries to European and American travel, their lockdowns have been pretty severe and severe curfews. Same thing with Kenya. In fact, there are very, very high consequences for being out after curfew, and a lot of physical violence, unfortunately. But they are in South Africa staging back in when you can go out and where, and it's a lot more severe than in the States. But the lockdowns themselves kept, quite a bit of porous border COVID-19 from happening. So I think what we're going to find, and what our staff is gearing up for, is when those borders open back up, and a lot of these countries, they're traveling first domestically before they'll open up international borders. But when they do, they are going to be hit with waves that they may or may not be expecting. And so the kind of rules that we're being told just right now, we're looking at and saying, these really aren't going to work in developing countries. Social distancing, 6 feet apart, outside maybe, but if you get your stuff at a market, daily because you don't have much refrigeration or active gardens, you're going to need to go to those spaces which aren't necessarily social distance. So what do you do, and how do we make sure that there's not stigma? Masks are going to be so important in that context. Some of the other things that we don't think about, we're washing our hands constantly. Not everybody has running water. And how do you make sure there's communal hand washing stations? And again, making sure that people have access to them and they're not spending all day in line trying to wash their hands for the one interaction that a minute later is going to prove that not. So there's just a lot of those kinds of things. We've seen it before. I mean, in order to treat the same kind of issues for a lack of running water, but clean water, we have things called aqua tabs. We might take them on a camping trip here. Actually, people are using them every day for their water there. So how do we make sure that there's enough disinfectant on hand and the appropriate disinfectants in those communities?
Wow. Karen, I'm sure you don't have an accurate answer to this, but
you're going to ask anyway.
You play a public health expert on LPTV. It's okay.
But as you're hearing kind of emerging conversation and chatter on this, everybody's talking about, let's get back to work and it's all going to be normal. How long do you think we're looking at? What do you think the future holds? And I caveat this with, this is not Karen's professional opinion.
Yeah, there's no way I'm touching that. But I will tell you this.
What are you hearing in terms of speculation and the chat on the
right. So I'll tell you concrete facts that I know, and then I'll react to some of the things I heard you say already today. So one of them is that in Washington, D.C., when we're looking at the case counts, we're looking across Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia because, there are no borders here, right? So our security professionals who are looking at this are calling for the doors of our office to first likely be able to open. And this is not everybody rushes back in. This is our facility services are first allowed back in around the last week of June. And then what happens next is going to be determined by case counts and any kind of boomerang effect. And even that last week of June is, of course, subject to watching case counts as well. So that's the first thing. We are all eyes open to the boomerang effect in the second wave of what could happen. And like I said before about countries opening up their borders, and I think a lot of countries feel this way about the US as well. When that happens, if everybody doesn't have this thing under control, nobody's going to have it under control, right? Because we're going to ping pong between countries and bringing it. So that's something else. Now, having said all that, I want to comment on your black elephant. So number one, this might be the first reason that we live like this. This is not going to be the last. And the potential for things to go back to normal, as far as my colleagues are concerned, is nil. So how long will we be wearing masks in public? How long will we be social distancing once you're actually allowed to leave your house is what we're looking at, particularly in our work in these developing countries. And in fact, what I have heard, and I had to clarify it because I wanted to understand the messaging, was there is no business as usual anymore. That's not happening. There is going to be a new normal. And so we are all going to build that together. There's no question. You know, you're absolutely right about resilience and entrepreneurs. And it really is the entrepreneur who tends to bring that resilience, builds the jobs, takes the innovative ideas forward, pivots because they're nimble enough. And I will say, one of the things that attracted me to PSI 5 years ago is that, yes, it has 50 years of history. It has a staff of over 5,000 across the world, but it actually has maintained its entrepreneurial spirit from day one. And so, as I was talking about in the beginning, that pivot that we've been able to make because we're so in tune with the marketplace, we think of our profit margin as health impact. But we're very, very conscious of needing to have something that stands in for a profit margin that way. So I think, you know, the very people that you serve are going to be the people that bring this country back and create a new normal. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
Well,
so music festivals, 2021, yay or nay?
My son's bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
You know.
A related question. What's the likelihood of two young men going back to school in September?
Not soon enough. Yeah. You know, my niece is heading to her freshman year of college, and we're all saying prayers for her. Yeah. You know, none of us really know. I don't think even my public health colleagues would gander to guess.
Yeah. It really is, you know, it is about the data, right? And you can't predict because we have to see if, you know, there are further, you know, increases that we have to flatten and, you know, put measures back in place. And
part of going back June is to see the reaction.
Right.
Yeah, I think also we forget sometimes that particularly in this case, but usually there are humans behind the data. So human behavior dictates whether we're going to see spikes or we're going to see flattening the curve. And as we have governors who are opening Georgia and parts of Florida, you know, again, these are behaviors that are going to put those projections out further, because if we can't stop the things that cause this, and we are in each other's orbits, asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic, so there's something, there's a term I learned that I don't see in the news, but I hear my colleagues saying it's like shedding. That means like shedding is when you can pass it on to each other. And shedding can start even pre-symptomatic if you're going to get symptoms, and for those who are asymptomatic, which we know. Right. So I don't see how we could actually combat this if we are opening, you know, up for business faster than we're actually seeing cases go down. And unfortunately, in some places, cases aren't going down; they're going up, and we're still, you know, opening back up. So people in those
Bob just shared Georgia.
Yeah, that's right. And I I was going to say, you know, I have friends in Georgia, the CDC's in Georgia. A lot of people are making choices to not go back out because they recognize the part that they play, and they don't want to get sick either. They don't want to get other people sick. So that's going to be a huge piece. The data is only as good as our behavior.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Ariel, I just wanted to ask you, as we thank Karen, Karen had put up a link to donate to PSI, and Ariel, would you just bring that back and make sure the link we can click through. We thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for coming on. It actually was really educational. We've been sort of hearing from business leaders in the business community, entrepreneur community, and you know, we've had a domestic perspective. So it was really interesting to hear more of a global perspective here.
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I always love hanging out with you guys. Next time with a glass of wine.
Yeah. I know, right? Even at a social distance, I'll take it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to see you soon in person, and we'll let you go. Thanks, Karen.
Take care.
I mean, I think today, thank you to both Karen and Rob. Talk about kind of that level set. First of all, stay home. That level set of the public health crisis that we are facing and the impact of that. And I think, you know, I think the thing I take away from both those conversations is the importance of recognizing that we have created, and there are even more vulnerable communities out there, vulnerable to the health crisis, vulnerable to access to the testing, to the antibody test, to the drugs, to the ultimate vaccine, but also just access to resources and food and support that is needed. And for those of us watching, you know, I think it's a reminder that things aren't going to go back to normal very quickly, and that those of us who are in these privileged positions of not having vulnerabilities there are in that privileged position, and we have an obligation to both be inclusive, but also to do our part to prevent this public health crisis from becoming even greater. Yeah.
It's interesting. The takeaway I had from both as well was how interconnected we all are in this society, both globally. You know, the idea of opening up borders and travel. If you don't have it controlled in one country, or even in a county, in a state, you're at risk. And you know, to some of Rob's comments about the interconnectedness in society of vulnerable populations, both from a health perspective, but also sort of the exposure that we're seeing of the cracks in the system and economically. So thank you again to both Rob and Karen who are on today.
We're grateful for your work.
Yeah.
Next week, do you want to talk about next week?
You better talk about next week. Who's coming up?
All right. Next week, we are going to be having Brian from Shift Capital talk about OZs. We're going to have an OZ day.
All right.
In the context of COVID-19, I think OZs are ripe for some reinvention. Talk about time to not think about our tax incentives. And we're also going to be having Ann Rogan of the city of Stockton, who I was on a panel with yesterday and had a blast getting to catch up, talk opportunity zones, make fun of Scott Shalett. And on Wednesday, I'm very excited. We're going to be on the Wind Down hosting House.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, Helena and Woody, founders of House, a direct-to-consumer aperitif brand. So we're shifting from wine to aperitif, closely related, and it's delicious.
It is delicious, and they are going to be great guests. And we're also going to be giving away some House products next week on the Wind Down. So people should definitely be tuning in at 4:30 on Wednesday.
Great.
And then on Thursday, we're going to be delighted to have Aaron Galmore from our Launchpad community in New Orleans, and he's going to be talking all things food. He's the CEO of Grassroots, a delicious and healthy alternative to chips and snacks.
They're good snacks.
They are good snacks. And John Atkinson of Idea Village, who's going to talk to us probably a little bit more about the resiliency series that we had. You're going to be on tomorrow.
Yep.
Talking post-Kadrina experiences on this amazing program that Wendy told us about. So I'm not sure if you can tune into that or if that's,
I think people can.
People can tune in. It's going to be exciting and it's going to be a great week.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're going to wrap it here and we will see you all next week. So long.